Are you an early stage founder revolutionizing the future of retail? Then you're in the right place. My name is Sapna Shah, and I'm an angel investor investing at the pre-seed and seed stage in retail tech, e-commerce, marketplaces, and consumer. I'm also the founder of Retail X Series, an ecosystem to help early stage founders in the retail and consumer sectors. Retail X Series includes events, a YouTube channel, a Slack community, resources for founders, and this podcast. In this podcast, I interview founders, investors, and experts in the retail space, and we dig deep into the tactics around key topics that early stage founders want to hear about. Welcome to the Retail X podcast. Hello, everyone. Today's episode is a little different than our usual. Today, we're going to dive deeply into building a consumer brand without VC dollars. Our guests today are Sarah Kauss, founder of S'well, an iconic water bottle brand, and Amanda Herson, partner at Founder Collective, a seed stage VC firm. We'll hear about how Sarah built her brand without raising any VC dollars and why VC isn't always the best fit for consumer brands, and sometimes when it is. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah and Amanda.
Thank you. Excited to be here today, Sapna and Sarah.
Looking forward to the conversation.
So am I. So exciting. So let's get started with some background to give our listeners some context. Can you each tell us a little bit about yourselves and your companies? And Amanda, let's start with you.
Sure. So Sapna, I like to say, I have quite literally grown up with retail and consumer pulsing through my veins. I grew up as part of a family that ran a very small family business back in Cape Town, South Africa, and watched this business grow over years from, one store to many stores and online digital business as well. And always kind of looking to grow really capitally efficiently and always being bootstrapped. And after that, I was very fortunate to move to the US to come to college and went off into management strategy consulting, where I worked with many of the top CPG brands and advised them with my very limited knowledge on how to grow and scale, but really had that operator itch and moved over to limited brands, where I had the opportunity to build and grow many of the best known brands in America, particularly in the beauty space, and loved that opportunity of really getting to understand the consumer, obsess about the consumer. I did a little bit of a switch around after business school and moved over to the investing side, where I really got to think through, well, how do you invest in these businesses and which are the businesses that can really scale, and love thinking about consumer through this lens, but still always hyper-focused on the end customer, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what creates success. I ended up moving back to South Africa, and with my customer obsession, threw myself back into building and growing specialty retail, spent almost a decade building and growing a bunch of specialty retail businesses and e-commerce businesses. And I'm now back in the US, investing not just in consumer and retail, but across all industries. And I really enjoy working with my incredible partners at Founder Collective, investing in the best and brightest founders across all industries.
Amazing. Sarah?
Well, it's hard to go after that, Amanda. This is why I like to hang out with you. I always learn something new about you. So I'm Sarah Kauss, and what's my background? My parents were both entrepreneurs, so I probably had some little bit of entrepreneurship in my veins as well, Amanda. I went to undergrad in the University of Colorado, and when I graduated, I was a CPA, and I went off and worked at Ernst & Young for a while. And I was lucky enough to be at EY during .com 1, and I worked with a lot of amazing entrepreneurs in 99, 2000, 2001. And one of the things that a lot of those entrepreneurs had in common was business school. I didn't have the idea, and I didn't have the confidence really to start my venture, but I loved working with the entrepreneurs. I just wanted to jump to the other side of the table. I didn't want to be doing their taxes forever. I wanted to become one of them. So I went off to business school, and after school, worked for a few years and a bunch of different jobs and careers. I did commercial real estate development, working for a REIT. I built laboratories for scientists. I worked at a management consulting company, and I never came up with my big idea. And then lo and behold, I was hiking on a hot summer day in the mountains with my mom, drinking out of a reusable water bottle that wasn't insulated. It wasn't cute. And I had this epiphany moment that the world needed, somebody needed to develop a fashionable water bottle that kept things cold on days like that. And I started working on my business plan that afternoon and started my company later that week. And that was about 13 years ago. So I worked at S'well as the founder, first employee for over a decade as a CEO, and I'm really wearing all of the hats for a long time. And then last year I sold the business. So I'm a free agent. It's sort of nice to be on the other side now. And I'm an advisor. I'm an early stage investor in some things that have a little to do with the consumer and usually have something to do with sustainability, which is my North Star. I'm really enjoying some boards that I'm sitting on, and I have a 5-year-old, so it's a little bit fun to have a little flexibility in my day and not be working all of the time.
I love it. Love the story. And I just cannot wait to kind of dive into all of this. So the meat of this episode is really about how do you fund consumer brands, right? So many of the startups in our RetailX audience are super early stage consumer brands in a variety of verticals, everything from fashion to beauty to CPG. And most either think or are planning that VC dollars are going to be in their future. And, they've seen this cycle of what other brands have done. And so, Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you didn't go down that VC route with your company.
For me, it was a couple things. I started a purpose-driven business at a time that a lot of companies weren't necessarily doing so. I think now a lot of the businesses that I work with and I think a lot of the brands that I personally love and consume, they are, purpose is part of their mission. It's sort of, woven into their product or the service of the company. But I was afraid when I was starting my business, creating this beautiful, fashionable water bottle, but on a mission to bring clean drinking water to those in need at the same time that I'm creating a product that allows people to use less plastic waste. I wanted to create a product that brought clean drinking water to those that needed it the most urgently. I was nervous that if I took outside capital, there might be a push for greater profitability and potentially less spending where it came to the mission and what I really believe was one of the core values of differentiating the product. I also was a little nervous about, I guess, being a girl with a dream instead of a woman with a business. And so I wanted to get my act together a little bit and have maybe some swagger before I went in and had conversations with, venture folks. And next thing I knew, I was up and running and profitable, and I didn't necessarily need to go raise money. And I was so busy working in the business that I didn't take the time to work on the business and think that actually applying capital and smart capital at the earlier stages might have actually been a good idea. And so I don't know that not raising is the right route for every company. It might not even have been the right route for me, but because I didn't do it in the beginning because I was nervous about the mission. And then I was a little, maybe my ego was, well, I didn't want anyone to write me off until I had some great results. Next thing I knew, I was so darn busy that I never got my act together to write the business plan and go talk to smart investors like the Amandas of the world.
It's so interesting that you say that, because you said that you were also a little bit afraid that VCs might not agree with the mission and spending on the mission. But if you don't have that outside capital and you want to spend on your mission, you have to be profitable, right? You have to be generating cash flow. You have to not be in that sort of hole that you can kind of grow with more and more VC dollars and wait for profitability. So was that part of your goal, to be profitable so that you could spend on the mission?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned I was a CPA. The numbers were really important to me. So looking at the margins and making sure that we were profitable from the very first batch, from the very first order, it was one of the most important things. I still had business school debt when I was starting S'well. So I basically put some money aside and said, okay, this is what I'm willing and able to spend on my business. And I had a lot of inventory, right? I don't love to sell. It's not a comfortable place for me to be. but I had to turn that inventory into more dollars so I could invest back into the business. So it was really the kick in the pants for me to put on my backpack and walk into retailers and, tell the story of the brand and convert that into sales. But to answer your question specifically, like, it was very important to get to profitability for me. So then I could invest in the mission. I could invest in people. I could invest in the things that I knew that I needed to do, in addition to be able to fund growth and to buy more inventory to continue the cycle of meeting customers' demands.
And you mentioned the backpack and the backpack full of water bottles. Where else did you need to be scrappy because you didn't have kind of that $1.5 million pre-seed round?
I mean, everywhere. So from staffing, I was the first and only employee for a very long time. So it was everything from walking to the post office and shipping to PR and marketing and writing to editors and trying to get placement. No, there was no budget for anything. I took the photos for the first website. I wrote the copy for the first website. I had to ask my really cute business school friends to be the models on the first website. Some of my not so cute friends were a little upset. And they said, well, why did so-and-so get to go to a picnic in Central Park and pretend to drink out of a S'well bottle and you never called me? And I'm like, well, you're not as cute. It was a humbling experience after being a VP at a public company and having a business card and a team and a staff and a budget to all of a sudden starting with nothing. It was a humbling experience, but I think it was really a fun time to think about where to be scrappy, because I knew that there were some very important places in the business that I needed to spend. I needed to spend on product. I needed to spend eventually on people. People, turned out to be the most important place, I think, that I wound up spending, and probably should have earlier. But there was a whole bunch of places that I felt like I couldn't afford to spend it all because I just didn't have the capital to do so.
You also went to retail pretty early in your kind of evolution as a company, whereas I think a lot of times founders think that's much, much later. Start D2C, that going into sort of retail accounts is really hard without either raising a lot of money or already kind of being in a place where that flywheel is already working. What was your experience with retail, and how did you think about how that worked with it, funding the inventory and making sure that you had kind of the right placement in the stores and all of those things when you were so scrappy?
I think retail is really hard. I mean, I wish I had someone like Amanda on my board, or we were friends back then, because at least we could have a drink and cry about it. But I'm sure she'd have really good advice for me at the same time. Retail was hard when I did it. I think it's even harder now, now that I'm an advisor and I'm a board member to a bunch of companies. The retail environment is very difficult. And Sapna, you said it perfectly. I mean, it's very expensive. Retail is sometimes break even at best, sometimes even worse than break even when you really account for the payment terms and the chargebacks and the marketing budgets and what you need to pay to be on that end cap. But I did do retail early, and part of it was really a brand awareness play. Yes, it did help. I structured a lot of the contracts. Oftentimes the retailers really wanted the product. So I had some room to negotiate better terms, better margins. I played the scrappy bootstrap startup story hard. And I said, I was okay to say no. So I said no to Target, for example, for the better part of a decade before we went into Target. I created an entirely second line of products, Sip by S'well for Target. But again, I didn't have any financial backers that said we needed to hit any kind of targets in a certain year. So I could sort of play a hard game with retail. But retail is expensive. And yes, it ties up a lot of inventory. You give an interest-free loan to some of the biggest companies in the world, waiting for the payments and calling and begging for the check in the mail and dealing with returns and those types of things. But I would say in my case, our product needed to be seen. And I didn't have a budget for marketing. And so we did a big deal with a Starbucks, for example. We were in about 10,000 stores in the US and all over Europe and all over Asia. And it wasn't even about the product. I think they put 10 bottles on each shelf. They put a big sign out that said, S'well is our favorite hydration accessory. And it was holiday and people were standing in line getting their coffee, thinking, what am I going to get my kids' teachers? What am I going to pick up for my white elephant party at work, and then there's a giant sign right there that said S'well. I mean, that was just gold for us. And that was a profitable account. We did make money on it, but more than anything, it was brand awareness. And so I think retail is really hard and really expensive, but I think especially right now, D2C only is also really hard and really expensive. So, I think being omni-channel is almost table stakes, but you have to know what you're getting yourself into from a budget perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that Starbucks, that presentation, because I'm pretty sure my husband, we have a couple S'well bottles, and I'm pretty sure my husband bought me one because he saw it in Starbucks when he went to get his coffee. So it totally worked.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was like some great context on kind of your experience. Amanda, I want to switch over to you. You have very strong opinions on why VC isn't always the best fit for consumer brands that may or may not be the same as Sarah. So can you walk us through your thinking on VC dollars for consumer brands?
Absolutely. Firstly, I just think it's always so inspiring to hear Sarah's story, and it just so much humility and so much passion in the story. And I think Sarah did an incredible job building without VC dollars. Sometimes VC dollars really can and do help. But I think the point on the VC dollars that I really respect from Sarah is a point of you control your own destiny, and particularly when you're a mission-driven brand, that ability to really ensure that you stay true to your mission and don't just chase growth at all costs. You can lose that when you go down the VC path. And I think also there, and Sabna, I'm taking us off topic, but if you do go down the VC path, ensuring that the VC dollars you take are from the right VCs, I think is even more important along those lines. But let me actually answer the question you asked. I think, why is VC dangerous? We say quite publicly, it's Founder Collective, it's something we're maybe a little bit infamous for, but VC is a hell of a drug. And I think it's important to remember that, because really, once you take in that VC money, you are now on a roller coaster, and you are now forced to grow, and then you eventually need to raise more money. And I think you've just got to be very sure about what your direction is before you jump on that roller coaster. I think what happens to many consumer brands is you raise VC money and then kind of use that to buy customers. The problem is it's generally not sustainable. If the fundamental intrinsic value doesn't work and you're not buying sustainable customers, then you're constantly in this kind of CAC churn nightmare and have to keep raising more venture money. So I think it often takes you off kind of the core purpose, which is, as Sarah said, make sure that customers, whether that's B2B or B2C, are dying to have your product. That circumvents a lot of the need for that capital to buy customers. I think VC can be dangerous because you focus less on profitable customers and you focus more on kind of growth at all costs. And I also think that it takes you off kind of the North Star that all consumer businesses should be focused on, which is stay capital efficient. And we used to joke in our family business, we called it like the turning off the lights test. And it would be like, we would literally see who the employees were who would turn off the lights at the end of the day, because every single, not even dollar, but every cent counts when you're in consumer. And if you just get a whack of venture money and spend it really fast, you actually don't build that culture within the organization.
I love that. That is so true. And I think some of the best founders, Sarah is a great example here, some of the best consumer founders are particularly even ones in my portfolio, are so tight with a penny and a dollar, and the whole culture is that way, and there is no extraneous spending, and that makes a ton of sense. But tell me, Amanda, are there any times, or what are the times, when a consumer brand is a good fit for raising VC, at least in the early days or even in some of the later days?
Yeah, I think we have in our portfolio many incredible consumer businesses that have done phenomenal things and grown exponentially. I think when I look back and I look across them and I think about what are the types of businesses that should be raising venture, there are a few things I look for. One is, do you have an unfair distribution advantage? I actually think S'well was an example of that, and I don't think that's always the case. But I think through the corporate program that they created, you almost have an unfair distribution advantage, and it's harder to just switch. So I think there are opportunities, whether it's an acquisition hack or particular partnerships, where you really are not just throwing money at Facebook and Instagram, but you have a very unique point of view in terms of going to the market. I think in the current ecosystem, I think there are some consumer businesses that really create a data advantage. And through the data that they can ingest, they can create a much stickier ecosystem. They can create some virality, and they can also lower churn depending on what the consumer business is. But I do think there are consumer businesses where once they get enough of either your information or the data within the space, they're actually able to build out a moat. And then I think there are ones where there's really proprietary tech or a particular patent that you can protect, which is very rare, and I don't want to underemphasize that. I think that's incredibly rare. But I think there are times where it's like a really unique novel product that possibly is quite capital intensive and requires venture money in order to commercialize. And I do think that there are companies that make sense from that perspective. Look, at the end of the day, I think ultimately venture is 99% about really that founder and that exceptional founder and them seeing something that others in the market cannot see. And I think as a venture capitalist, to stay humble and recognize that in any space, whatever it is, there are going to be founders who are going to build exponential businesses. So while I might have a slightly tougher, higher bar in terms of consumer, I think I'm always still open to that exceptional founder who really can see growing a business that's not just based on buying customers or building a brand that's only about the brand. So I think those are kind of the things that I'm looking for.
So that's really interesting because right now I would say the overall VC market is really challenging. Well, it's challenging for everybody unless you're in generative AI as we sit here in October 2023. But certainly for startups in that retail and consumer space, it feels really challenging right now. It feels like many investors, including angels, including VCs, have pulled back from consumer brands right now. And maybe a lot, honestly, Amanda, for the reasons that you're talking about. Do you think that tide will turn and shift back to, if not where we were, but at least better than where we are? Or is this a fundamental shift in the way investors are thinking about these sorts of brands?
I think two things have changed structurally. One is I don't think that the public markets have been particularly kind to consumer companies. So I think from the exit perspective, people are a little bit more bearish. I also think that acquisition has fundamentally changed, and the days of super cheap acquisition and getting great returns for spending money across social platforms, that has also changed. So it's gotten more expensive to really build these outsized consumer companies. So I think that there are kind of barbells on both ends. That being said, I do think there's an incredible opportunity to build consumer businesses right now. I feel for founders out there who are like, well, you say that, but like, how do I even just get started? How do I get out of the starting blocks when no one wants to fund me? And I think in this environment with AI kind of the theme of the day, I do think there are going to be changes in how we consume, how we shop. I think there's a lot of talk around Gen Z spending habits. I think what needs to happen, though, is that there needs to be alignment from not just from funds and GPs, but actually from LPs in terms of what type of returns are expected for consumer businesses. What does a successful outcome look like for a consumer business? I think if we hang all our hopes on the next 20 consumer unicorns, it's going to be a really tough slug. Not every consumer business needs to be a unicorn, but I think if the investors know that going in, and Sarah mentioned this, but you really align and find the right investors who understand how valuable consumer businesses are built, who understand that it might not be 100x exit, it might be a 5 to 10x, which is fantastic for the founder, fantastic for the investor. But I think alignment around incentives for investors and the LPs who are investors of their investors, I think that's what needs to change in this ecosystem.
That's interesting. And I hadn't thought about it truly as an angel. I have no LPs, so I don't need to really think about LPs, but that's a really interesting point. And you're right, that exit profile does look really different. And we'll see if we get there as an industry. But in the meantime, I guess here's a question for both of you, whichever one of you would like to take it first. What other sources of funding other than VCs and angels make sense for consumer brands? What are you advising the companies that you're invested in or advising now in terms of what other kinds of funding sources should they pursue, if any?
I think Amanda had better advice here, so I'll go first. One that's maybe completely obvious, but ask for better terms. Ask your retailers, ask your partners, ask your manufacturers for everything that you can. Ask often, ask nicely. There are ways that you can potentially get discounts or different longer payment terms and things like this that really can help where needed. One of the things that I did when I was building S'well was I asked for a lot of deposits, and I played the we're a scrappy startup card and just said, listen, I can't do this big of an order. I can't do this big of a rollout. I absolutely need to get a deposit. And I started working with a lot of international distributors where I would ask them for a 50% deposit upfront, which more than paid for their order, which then would help me fund my US domestic orders. I had to be really careful and crafty with how I managed growth and how I bought inventory, just really trying to be creative on thinking about a lot of those payment terms and just asking and just being open about it, I think was helpful. Fast forward to today, I'm working with two different companies that happen to have very strong IP portfolios, and they've been able to do this IP note. Amanda, I'm not sure if you're seeing this with some of your companies or not, but it's almost like a loan against your intellectual property portfolio. And it is time consuming and it's a little bit of work to get done, but as a fundraiser, it's something that I didn't even realize was available to me when I was building and running S'well. But I'm working with two companies that have done this successfully in just the last couple of months. And it's almost like raising an entirely new round, but just sort of off of an asset that's already sitting on your balance sheet.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I had not heard about those. And so that's fascinating to me. Amanda, have you seen that as well?
I've started to see, I think with a lot of the legal tech, there's a lot more on kind of how do you monetize your IP. So have started to see, I haven't seen it specifically for consumer businesses, but I have started to see that more generally for IP. I think just to reinforce some of the things that Sarah said around getting your customers to fund you, getting suppliers to fund you. There is also factoring once you're a little bit larger and have signed contracts. And I think I'm seeing a lot of the factoring companies, it used to be a lot more kind of mom and pop, really professionalize, leverage technology, ingest some of your Shopify information to really understand your cash flow and assist there. So those are opportunities. I also think there are still some really fantastic focused funds and angels like Sapna who are focused and really understand the space. Another avenue to look at is there are several kind of strategic corporate arms that big brands want newness. So they are more than willing to write small checks. And more than the checks, I think it's really the introductions and distribution that help you get shelf space that become even more valuable. So there are some really fantastic studios and corporate venture arms. And then I also look at someone, a good friend of mine, Ari Bloom, who runs A-Frame Brands, which really focuses on this space, builds new brands, incubates new brands, but also then provides all the services to help you get out of the starting blocks. And I think I'm seeing more venture that is set up like that for consumer. And I'm hopeful that'll continue because I think it's a really interesting model for building consumer brands and helping them grow and flourish.
That's great. And I'll add one that I've seen a lot more of now, which is inventory financing through whether it's through the factory or an outside firm. I'm seeing a lot more consumer brands able to take advantage at earlier stages, maybe than ever before, to get their inventory financed, which I think really helps Sarah on what you were talking about on being really tight with the cash flow and really understanding where your money is tied up and where it's not. Okay, I have one question left for both of you, which is, and Sarah, I'll start with you. Given what we're talking about today, what's the one most critical piece of advice you would give consumer founders who are right now at the early stage in building their brands from the very beginning?
Well, I'm going to cheat and give you an answer that has a bunch of answers because I know you're only looking for one piece of advice. I think my piece of advice is to pick your partners very carefully. Pick your venture partner very carefully. I'm on a board with really smart, great venture partners right now. And man, they're helping this company along and outside of capital. I mean, helping them with customer and go to market and hiring. I mean, you name it, they are dedicated. And I wish I had anyone like that when I was in it and having challenges. But I would say that this advice also covers all your other partners, your manufacturing partners, your retail partners. You want the smartest accountant you can get that's going to really understand state tax nexus and where you're going to get in trouble in hiring. You want the smartest attorney that you can and the way that you write your IP portfolio. Like as much as I'm always about saving money and being scrappy. Know where you need to spend and really think about getting the best partners you possibly can. Everything from who and how you take money and capitalize the business and who you decide to do business with throughout the rest of your whole brand.
I love that. That's great advice. Amanda?
So I think mine also, I get two now because Sarah got a couple. My two would be one, just build as capital efficiently as you can. I think one allows you to own more of your company, but two, it gives you more options further down the road than having this monkey on your back when you've raised huge gobs and are spending and your burn is out of control. So I think from the get-go, build a capital efficient, not only business, but a capital efficient culture. And I would say the second most important thing is just be absolutely obsessed and maniacal about focusing on your customer. Because at the end of the day, if you have a customer who is obsessed with your brand or your product, it makes everything else much easier. And I think you get so distracted on the product, but just make sure that you keep listening to your customer, ear to the ground, understanding how they're changing, how their needs are changing. And I think if you can keep focusing on them, you're way more likely to be successful than all the other distractions that are going to happen as you build.
I think all this advice is great advice. I think it's so hard to start a business. And I think both of your perspectives, I think, have been so incredibly valuable. So thank you both for sharing your advice and your tips on the podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sapna. That was such fun and always a delight to have an excuse to spend more time with both of you.
Likewise, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for asking us.
And thank you for listening to the Retail X podcast. We'll have another new episode out shortly. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Retail X Series, check out www.retailxseries.com for more information, including recordings of past events. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Retail X Series. You could also learn more about me, find fundraising resources, or submit a pitch deck at www.redgiraffeadvisors.com. Thanks, and catch you next time.